What's cracking, everybody? My name's Scott, and this is a show where we talk all about what's been going on with the Seattle Kraken. Wait, didn't we just do one of these? Real quick, if you do find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Yes, we did just have a news update on the Kraken last week where we talked mostly about the Kraken's new bar and grill in their practice facility, which does continue to look more and more like potentially the best practice facility in all of the NHL. Of course, the Kraken must have been watching that video because I can't think of any other reason that they would have then, just a couple of days later, released even more news about the new practice facility, tweeting out pictures of the concrete slabs being poured that the 3 ice rinks will eventually go on. Of course, it is probably an important distinction to make that they did say this is the ice slabs being poured and not the ice itself, because if this is what the team thought ice looked like, yeah, they would have a whole lot more to be catching up on than we previously thought. Of course, though, while that is exciting news, it wouldn't quite be worth a full video of its own, so we did get quite a bit more news from the Kraken in the form of a press conference with Ron Francis just after the trade deadline, in which he did give us some updates on a few of the things that we've been following up to this point, one of which being that last payment to the NHL that the team still has to make in order to fully officially become the 32nd team of the league and start being included on league meetings and stuff like that. A payment that the team is focusing on the start of the second quarter in order to make, so probably sometime in early to mid-May. We also did get a bit of an AHL update in regards to where the team's AHL players will be playing for the first season, as once again the Palm Springs AHL affiliate for the Kraken won't be fully up and running until the Kraken's second season in 2022-23. So when it comes to where those players are going to play, Francis said that ideally they would play all with one team, and currently they do have one team that they're working with, and they're hoping to get that finalized sometime in the near future. So it does look like they're going to go the route of having all of their AHL players at least being able to play together on the same team for that first year, which does seem like it would be a benefit for them down the road. But he didn't elaborate at all on which team they're going to be with and what that's really going to look like with 2 teams worth of players playing on a single team. And also, of course, there's still the possibility that they could end up on maybe 2 separate teams, but again, it is looking like they're going the route of trying to keep them as consolidated as possible so they can play together. Now, before we get to the updates about the Kraken's search for their first head coach, which to me anyway made up the majority of the newsworthy portion of this press conference, there was one other little nugget of goodness that snuck in there, when in reference to player acquisition, whether that's through drafts, free agency, or what have you, Francis did say that he tends to think that the more darts you get to throw at the board, the better chance you have at success, which could be particularly relevant when it comes to this year's entry draft. Now, when it does come to this year's entry draft, which will happen just a couple of days after the expansion draft will happen, the Kraken will be given the same odds at the first overall pick in the lottery as the 3rd worst team in the league. Or you can probably better think of it as they'll have the 3rd best odds at the first overall pick. Which also, given this year's updated rules for the lottery system, in which now only 2 teams will be lotteried into those first 2 picks, that does mean that the worst the Kraken can be selecting is 5th overall. So given that fact, and then also the fact that this particular draft was never really being seen as one that was going to be all that top heavy in the first place, at least when it comes to obvious NHL superstar level talent like McDavid when he was drafted, or Matthews, or Lafreniere last year. Plus, then you throw in how difficult it has been to scout these players that will be getting drafted because most of the junior leagues and places that they would be playing in have played very little, if at all, during COVID. On top of what Francis had to say about the more darts thrown at the board, the better, all kind of leads me to think that they could be looking at trading out of that early pick to get more picks later in the draft, with the idea that it's really going to be hard to tell who the 5 best players are, so the more players you can get, the better chance that you have at getting a player that pans out. And while that certainly would make entry draft day a little bit less exciting for Kraken fans, for those of us who are also Seahawks fans, trading down or out of the first round entirely to get more picks is definitely something that we've become accustomed to over the last few years, so at least it wouldn't be anything new. And in this case, may actually be the right decision. Plus, don't forget, very much like Vegas did in their first year, it's still pretty likely that the Kraken will be picking up at least a couple more draft picks during the expansion draft, so they will get plenty of darts to throw at that board. But now we finally do move on to where the Kraken are at with finding that first head coach. The big quote from Francis here was, when asked who that first head coach was going to be, he said, "You look at guys who are sitting out there currently without a job, you look at guys who are currently working that maybe have expiring contracts, and you look at other situations that may be looking to make a change." Now, to be fair, that does pretty much cover all of the bases pretty well here, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to try to read between the lines a little bit. Now, first of all, we do have a pretty good idea of at least who some of the finalists could be for that head coaching role, and when asked directly about if there was a finalist list that the Kraken themselves have, Ron Francis said, "Yeah, we have a spreadsheet," but he was again a little bit coy about committing to the fact that they had just a couple of names they're working off of, and did say that if somebody that they weren't necessarily thinking about wowed them in an interview, they could still potentially go with someone not on their list. Which, fair enough, but I think we can pretty safely stick to some of the big names that we've looked at so far, which when it comes to guys that are currently out there that don't have a job, that would include guys like Bruce Boudreau and Gerard Gallant. Now still, at this point, at least to me anyway, Gallant would still look like the frontrunner and the guy that I would like to see eventually get this job. But Bruce Boudreau has a little bit more directly said that if he was offered a job by the Kraken, he would happily take it and he would like to coach an expansion team. But again, he's an NHL level head coach who's out there looking for a job, so what is he supposed to say? No, I'd like to take any job other than that one? I don't think so. Still though, he wouldn't be a bad option, and I think he could do decently well in the role. And I suppose if you do want to get real literal with his wording here in this first section, and specifically that part that says guys that don't currently have jobs, then that would eliminate Mike Babcock, as he did take that job with Saskatchewan University. But again, that might be a bit of a stretch, and I still don't know that Babcock was really that much of a front runner or somebody they were considering anyway, considering he probably wouldn't have taken that job with Saskatchewan University if the Kraken had shown any interest. Probably the most interesting part of this quote, though, and to me definitely the easiest part to read into a little bit, would be that middle section where he talks about looking at guys who may be coaching in the NHL currently but on expiring contracts, which would seem to be a pretty direct reference to Rob Brind'Amour in Carolina. And honestly, especially considering some of the hiring ties this team already has to Carolina even outside of Ron Francis, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if this is the guy that the team would see as their number one choice if he were to become available to them. But with that being said, again, I don't think it's terribly likely that Brind'Amour will be available to them, especially considering how Carolina is doing right now. Unless they get ousted in the first round of the playoffs, I just don't see any way that he doesn't extend his contract with Carolina as their head coach. Unless, of course, he really wants to be in Seattle. As far as that last section where he's clearly talking about guys that could end up getting fired at or before the end of the season, I don't know that there's anyone that he's specifically referencing here that we've talked about so far. More so, he's just saying that they're keeping their options open at this point in time and aren't going to be making a final decision at least until probably the end of the season. Which, speaking of that timeline of when they are looking to make the hiring of the head coach, the big takeaway here was that he did say they are going to be patient with it and that we probably won't know much more, and even they probably won't know a lot more as far as who the head coach could be for another couple of months, probably into middle of the playoffs or so. Which, again, to me anyway, the fact that the team is willing to say that they could wait until halfway through the playoffs to make a decision about the head coach really points pretty clearly to the fact that they've probably waited as long as they have because they are watching very closely what happens with Brind'Amour and the Hurricanes as far as that extension to his contract. Now, to be fair, there has also been some talk that the Kraken could be looking at some guys who have yet to actually have a head coaching role in the NHL, but look like they could be on the verge of getting that first chance. But with that being said, Francis did also say that in a perfect world, he'd like a head coach who's been in that role before for the Kraken's first head coach. So while it's not necessarily fully out of the question that they could go for a first-time head coach, I do think it's fairly safe to say that they will go for a guy with some experience in the role, which, with a new team, probably does make a lot of sense. So in the end, for me, if I had to pick 3 finalists for who I think the Kraken's first head coach is going to be, I think it probably comes down to one of Boudreau, Gallant, or Brind'Amour, with maybe at this point, given everything we've heard from the team, the most likely guy to get the job probably being Gallant, but only because Brind'Amour probably gets extended. If Brindamore is available for some reason, then it seems like he's probably their favorite and then would probably get the job. As far as when this decision comes for the Kraken and their first head coach, again, I think this all pretty much hinges at this point on the Hurricanes and Rob Brindamore. Because if we were to see an extension for Brindamore, say, before the playoffs, then I do think there's a decent chance the Kraken just go ahead and pull the trigger on Boudreau, or maybe more likely Gallant. But if Carolina is waiting until the end of their season to make a decision on whether or not they extend Brindamore, then it probably just depends on how far through the playoffs they end up making it. Because even without an extension, if Carolina were to make it to the Cup finals or even the conference finals, I do think at that point, because of amount of time left before the expansion draft, the Kraken would probably be best suited to go with either Boudreau, Gallant, or I guess another option. Also at that point, and probably rightly so, assuming that Carolina would eventually extend Brindamore. Either way though, it's no more than a couple of months away as things continue to get more and more real and more exciting for us Kraken fans. That will do it for now though, so if you have made it to this point in the video, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any other potential coaching candidates I didn't mention down in the comment section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace!